I always enjoy talking to black metal legends. It's something that in around 2 decades now of writing and talking about underground music, I've been afforded the pleasure of doing a fair amount of times. It's just fascinating to me, that time, that place, Norway, the mid-90s, all the stuff that happened, all the music that was made. Of course, time moves on, and a lot of these guys have moved on with it. And on this episode of the Metal Insight podcast, we're going to talk to one of them, Sigurd Wongraven, otherwise known as Satyr from Satyricon, one of the most important and, it must be said, individual bands of the black metal era. They're going to be playing Dublin on March 10th, and so the time seemed right to take a deeper dive into their pretty fascinating new album. It's called Deep Calleth Upon Deep. It's a real return to form after 2 or 3 albums that I think, if I'm honest, I'd say did tread a bit of water. Most importantly, it's drum work. The drum work on this album is absolutely top flight stuff. Drummer Frost is a sensation on it, and as we'll hear in this podcast, that didn't come easy.
He had to fall flat on his face to achieve those amazing things that he has achieved.
Satyr also tells us about Satyricon's strange tour with Pantera, of all bands.
When you were around dying, everything has to be his way or no way at all.
And about how he dealt with the news of the tumour that he's currently recovering from. So that's it, episode 44 of the Metal Insight podcast, produced and reported by Metalireland. I'm Earl Grey. Before we start, just a few announcements as ever. Metalireland's going to be getting behind the Rally of Lou Longarm Festival, which is happening on July 28 and 29 this year. It's got a great festival lineup featuring Coroner, Slough Fig, absolutely fantastic, Darkest Era, Phil Campbell and the Bastard Sons, ton of other awesome bands. It's happening at the Irish Military and War Museum in County Louth, hence the name, and we're going to be bringing you much more on that as the months go by. You can get your tickets at ticketstop.ie or check out luglongarm.com. That's L-U-G-H Longarm, L-U-G-H-L-O-N-G-A-R-M.com. Elsewhere, another note from our kind sponsors to Metalireland. Killswitch Engage hit Dublin's Academy on August 1st, while Avenged Sevenfold will be in Belfast's SSE Arena on the 6th of June. And before that, this week actually, we've got Skid Row plus Toesland coming up in Belfast's Limelight on March the 3rd. So, on with the show. The first thing I asked Sigurd, or Satyr as I suppose we have to call him, is about one of the more controversial points about the band's new album, and that is its artwork. A stark, simple charcoal drawing which took a lot of people, including myself, by surprise.
The main graphic designer, Satyricon, that I worked with in the 90s with, albums like Nemesis, Divina and all that, he more or less stopped doing album covers and focused on art mostly. I asked him when working on this record whether this would be a project for him, and I remember he wrote me back and said that this is a type of inquiry in the category offer that cannot be refused. Mm-hmm. And I started explaining to him a little bit more in detail at that point about the musical, lyrical, emotional content of this record. And he said that it just happens to be that he's been involved with the Munch Museum in a very large project that involves digitalizing the catalog of 9,000 pieces or whatever it is. It's very extensive. He donated everything that he ever made to the city of Oslo.
Really?
And it was going through all these things. I noticed this one, which is called The Kiss of Death, which I felt had the minimalism, the rawness, the existentialism, dark, piercing type of feel that I felt spoke well with the music and the lyrics of the record. Yeah. And to be completely honest, I had no idea that it would cause such an emotional stir, but it did. If I may say so, I think what I liked the most about it is what I have referred to as it's I say that with a glimpse in the eye, but it's Dark Throne-esque qualities.
Well, there are many Dark Throne-esque, if not comparisons, then I suppose parallels we could draw with Satyricon, and that's something that I did want to come to. I mean, you have been on a path of simplicity this last 15 years, really, and I would say that actually Deep Calleth Upon Deep draws back a little bit from that, because, you know, around Diabolical and around Nero, you were getting extremely pared back, very, very simple, minimalist, brutalist. But I think with stuff like, you know, To Your Brethren in the Dark and stuff like that, you've got a very rich melodic sense in there that, you know, it's just a bit more developed. And the title track as well, it's a little bit more developed now than the straight out simplicity of those immediate prior albums. Would you say that maybe you have started, to get a little less simple again? Have you drawn back on the brutal simplicities?
I mean, it's hard to come up with a good definition of what that is, because I feel that, I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I'm not trying to be difficult, but I would suggest that a song like To the Mountains is no less advanced than lots of so-called progressive black metal or whatever it is. But I think that the difference with Satyricon and let's say Emperor is that so Emperor, what they used to do was to have a very advanced approach and extremely sophisticated and impressive, but also it did have a little bit of that Yngwie Malmsteen, how can less be more? More is more.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And I remember speaking to my friend Ishan about that on I think it was the last record the studio record that they did, and I said that that to me it's hard to digest, but there is one song that I thought was really good, and I mentioned that song, and he said he was so disappointed with me, and he said, well, that's the most simple song on the record. and I said, well, why did you make it the single though? Because it's your first single, right? And he said, yeah, but so I mean, to me that was a little bit of a contradiction right there.
Yeah.
Because he's saying, like, why do you like that song the most? It's not my best effort. And then to me it's like, well, why did you make it the single? You made it the single because you know that it has some immediate power to it, and
yes.
maybe that is not, doesn't speak to your intellect, but it speaks to people's emotions, and you know that.
Yeah.
And for me, one thing doesn't have to rule out the other. I happen to love Motorhead and I happen to love AC/DC, but I'm also very fond of Django Reinhardt and Edvard Grieg, and I like many different things, both so-called simple things and things that are considered to be quite advanced. And with Satyricon, I think that the idea is that you have one part saying, oh, I love this and blah blah blah, and then the others say, like, oh, I like the old stuff and not the new stuff, it's too simple, primitive, whatever, boring. But to me, I have to say that when I write songs like I used to do back in the days, with no consideration of tempo, no consideration of rhythm changes, no consideration of key or any like intellectual approach. When I write music like a careless teenager fanboy, I can write stuff that is good, but it does not take me long because it is all intuition based.
Yeah, well, it all flows, doesn't it? It just flows.
Yeah. But for me to write something, you know, it's like I say to people when they say, you know, Highway to Hell is really simple, and I tell them, why don't you do it?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, it's to write a song like King.
Yeah.
Is really, really hard.
Yeah.
It is really, really hard. You know, to make a song that is that has, you know, some sort of stadium epic feel to it, that is very direct, that speaks to you unconditionally, that has a catchy and very driven presence, and that on top of that has some sort of occult atmosphere.
Yeah.
That was very, very hard to do, and something I spent a lot of time on. But I have written other songs that maybe sound more advanced, but didn't take me that long to write.
I mean, the best example, I guess, I mean, the one that really stays, I mean, the real achievement I find of this album, if it isn't To Your Brethren in the Dark, definitely is Deep Calleth Upon Deep. I mean, that is just an absolute earworm, in as much as it, you know, it will not leave your mind once heard. But, you know, we talk about simplicity, we talk about directness. Obviously, some of the most challenging and stretching material, of course, is Frost's work. And I think on this album, more so than any of the recent albums, his work is absolutely spectacular. And
Yes.
the tone that he has managed to capture out of that drum kit, more so even than the playing. But, of course, most of the tone comes from the playing. But, you know, his work on this is an absolute joy to the ears. Just I know your stuff is what it is, but tell me about how he tell me about how many layers of writing it goes through as he expresses himself through those drum strokes. I mean, how much refinement, how many passes?
This was a really interesting journey to watch him on this record. This is by far the process where he has developed the most, and what he really did is that he really developed at the very end of the project, interestingly enough, and he had to fall flat on his face to achieve those amazing things that he has achieved. And I think that it's only in hindsight that he can truly appreciate what he has done, because I think that we were a team of people that helped him redefine himself as a drummer. He was the one that had to do the work, but we had to sort of light up the path for him. And those people were his drum teacher. It was the tracking engineer during the drum recording session, and myself as his bandmate, colleague, and friend. And to try and narrow down, you know, a 3-year-long process in a few minutes. Basically, the way it went down is that it was, to me, without comparison, the most frustrating process that I've ever been through with drums, because I tried to say again and again and again and again, why are you playing stuff that sounds like something you did when we were working on the last record? It's not 2012 anymore. It's 2016, it's 2017. Those were the kind of things that I said to him. So I said, your solutions sound dated, and I don't want anything that is dated, and you have to differentiate between something which is classic and something which is dated. And what you refer to as classic is not classic, it's just dated. And we went through a lot of stuff, and I think he was pretty much hell-bent on doing things the way I had done it, and he could not really comprehend what it is that I was referring to. But we went into the studio to try and start tracking a little bit, and that didn't go well at all.
Right.
That didn't go well at all. And basically the feedback from the tracking engineer was that it's your record, but if you ask me, this is not going to work. This just doesn't sound right at all. So without going too much into detail with that, what we thought was that let's have a really, really good drum teacher come in with a fresh look on things, and let's hear what's his opinion, and we just
well, hang on, if I put myself in Frost's shoes for a second, if I may, if that was me and I was the drummer at that point, I would be sort of telling you guys, do you know what, keep your nose out, thanks, otherwise, do you know what, forget it, I'm out of here, we've done plenty and I'm gone if you don't like what I do.
Exactly.
How did he react to the notion that a drum teacher would come in and analyze his work?
Well, I mean, I know that most people are probably like what you just said, but he's not like that. He's very humble, and he thinks he's almost like an old school football player. He thinks that the team is bigger than himself. Satyricon as an institution is something far greater than his own persona. That's the way he thinks, and what he did is that he just got a lot of feedback on how to approach things. It was just really simple. He would ask, why do you do it like that? And so, well, I don't know. Well, have you ever tried, instead of start doing that with your right hand, how about you start doing that roll with your left hand and see where that takes you? And then all of a sudden it would sound 10 times better.
The drums on this album, to me, in as much as you are the vocalist in the band, and I wrote this in the review at the time, it seems to me that the drums have their own voice and that they have their own points to make and their own expressions to make. And the thing that always comes back to me when I listen to this album, I suppose more than your others, is I just think like Ginger Baker and John Bonham,
Yeah, sure. And those are some of his idols. But that was also, very interesting because I would say things, when we were working together, because I was for the most part present when this drum teacher came in with a different perspective on things. I would say to him that what I don't understand is why the snare sounds so inconsistent. And then the drum teacher say, oh, well, I hear you. It's not because he's not hitting it hard, because he is, but he's hitting at different places all the time.
Yeah.
And if you want it to sound consistent, you're going to have to hit it in the middle consistently, not out on the left or on the right or top or the bottom, but right in the middle. That's the only way to make it sound consistent. And then Frost said, well, but I'm going to have to sit like this and blah blah blah. And the drum teacher said, are you sure? What if we try and move this a little bit? Then you will find that your left hand will find the middle itself. You don't have to sit there and think about it. So But you have to understand that when I said to Frost that, why don't you look at your configuration? Then he would tell me to mind my own business. Basically,
I was going to say, did he ever tell you about the way you played guitar?
But see, that's the thing, is that is a typical drummer approach. Is that the assumption is that the only one who can ever know anything about drumming is a drummer.
Yeah.
And then I understand that, and I find that to be completely, normal. But then again, it doesn't really make sense, because some of these observations that you make, if you're a piano player or a guitarist, is this, it's going to be the same. Like if you hear someone sitting there playing the drum kit, and let's say he's doing, he's playing crash cymbal, snare, and kick, and you tell him it's not going to sound like a proper beat if you play the crash cymbal 20 times harder than you need to. You need to come down in order for it to sound a little bit more balanced. Then these are observations that you don't have to be Dave Lombardo to make. And for me also, like when I sit together with a drummer and everything about his body language screams complicated, then you start thinking to yourself, I don't know about how drums should be set up, but what I do know is that I've seen a lot of other drum kits, and they don't look like anything like this kit. And then secondly, I can see that your shoulders are up by your ears, and and a lot of the time where it doesn't make sense to have your arms crossed, your arms are indeed crossed. But I think it was too much to ask him to listen to me when it came to that stuff. But however, when the drum teacher came in with that perspective, he was receptive to it.
Rebel Extravaganza, hard to believe, nearly 20 years. It's terrifying. That was so modern in its day. When you look back at that, who was the Satyr of 20 years ago? When you look back at your snarling face on the front of that album, and who were you 20 years ago?
Well, I remember what I was thinking back then. What I was thinking to myself was that it was disappointing how black metal had developed, because I felt that I in my eyes, in my perception, in my view, black metal was constantly moving forward. When I looked at some of my idols, I thought, I always kept referring to, I was so impressed by the musical bravery of Celtic Frost. I'm not talking about Cold Lake, of course, but I'm talking about the inclusion of classical and operatic elements onto Megatherion. I felt that the avant-gardism of Into the Pandemonium, all these things was done by a really, really brave band. And I even thought with Bathory, how they became more and more epic with time was also a development that I thought was really, really fascinating. And then I thought it was so strange, because then to me it was as if there was some sort of meeting point between Gothic imagery and Gothic music and black metal that made no sense to me. And I said, hold on, this is very unlike anything that I subscribe to, and this really has nothing to do with what makes black metal interesting.
Well, this is the kind of high point of Dimmu Borgir and Cradle of Filth and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. And then I thought to myself, I'd rather try and do something more gritty, something more contemporary, and to put it in tabloid terms, we said, okay, no fake blood. If we're going to have blood in the pictures, let's go and get a bucket of pig's blood from the butcher.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
And we said that if you're going to have keyboards, no string samples.
Yeah.
Let's just use some old 70s analog keyboards. You know, and that type of approach was because we didn't like the direction that black metal was moving, and we wanted not only to do something different but also make a bit of an extreme statement while doing it. And I remember the criticism that came at the time was that it was, I think people were saying, oh, it's like techno, it's like electronic music.
It really isn't.
Yeah,
really,
and I thought
isn't.
to myself, listen, so the difference between this and Nemesis Divina would be that this is much more misanthropic, it's faster, it's more merciless, it's more relentless, lyrics are much more black, dark, and unforgiving.
Yeah, but people just heard with their eyes. They didn't hear with their ears, you know.
Exactly. And then I thought to myself, for those of you who look with something a little bit more jolly, something more fairy tale-esque, you will be severely disappointed. But do not blame it on the record.
Yeah.
So that record, I insist that this record was too many people. It was too tough on them. It was too tough of a record. But who's going to say, this is too tough, this is too relentless? Yeah. No one's going to say that. So, oh, it's too modern, it's this and that. And a lot of that stupidity just comes down to listening with your eyes, you know?
Yeah. One of the really weird things at around that time or shortly afterwards is that I think the last time I saw you guys was actually 2000 or 2001 or something, and weirdly it was with Pantera and Powerman 5000. I mean, how did you get on that tour? And you know, I know that was a gamble. I know it was trying to get you to different people, but I'll never forget, I saw you in Glasgow, and I'll never forget, you know, seeing you guys the Barrowlands. It was a fucking great, you know, looking at you guys was a phenomenon, because you had, you know, bathed in dry ice, seeing you guys there, and then a kind of slightly sloppy Pantera God, it was just really strange. And Powerman before you was, I mean,
do you remember that Kronos was with us on stage?
Do you know what, I've forgotten. No, I don't remember.
He was on stage singing Havoc Vulture.
Fuck no, I mean, it's so long ago, man. It's so long ago. But I just remember the whole thing being totally surreal, and thinking Satyricon, while superb, and I was very much looking forward to seeing it, but I just remember thinking, what is this? You know, I mean, how did that come together? Why did that happen?
Not that complicated, really. That was just Philip Anselmo really liked the band, and we were doing a musical project together. We had just started called Ibon, and which also included Fenris from Dark Throne, and then they were doing a Euro tour. He wanted us to be on that tour. Nuclear Blast didn't want to do the tour because they felt that there were two factors. Number one, in their heads at the time, they're obviously different now, but 18 years ago, the mindset of Nuclear Blast was like this: if it's popular in Germany, it'll be popular everywhere else. If it's not popular in Germany, it's a complete failure.
Yes.
And at the time, Pantera had lost its grip on the German markets. So hence it was a meaningless tour in the eyes of Nuclear Blast, even if we were playing arenas in Italy, France, England, and whatnot. You know. So I had to get the money myself to do it. And the other obstacle was Pantera's management that really didn't want us on tour. And
well, you see, I can imagine how that would be. I can imagine a situation in which Phil, I mean, we all know how much he's into his music. I mean, everybody knows that. I can imagine a situation where he said, get me this amazing underground black metal band, and the management going, who the fuck are these people? What?
And I can tell you that Powermind 5000 was a part of that force trade. That was the only reason why they were on that tour. I don't even know if they know that themselves, but I do. The only reason why they were on that tour is because that was a sort of some middle ground solution. You know, we can't just have that weird black metal band out of Norway. That's just not going to work. So they put in a Warner signed act represented by some of the same people as Pantera from Los Angeles in the middle, and which was really stupid because Pantera's fans didn't like their music at all, even less so than our music.
I remember 200 to 300 people out of the whole gig that night. I do remember, you know, a very dedicated circle of about 200 to 300 people up at, you know, right up at the front for all of us watching Satyricon, and nobody quite knowing what to do after. People just standing around looking at Powerman, thinking, what are we even supposed to do with this? You know?
Philip wasn't very excited about their participation on the tour either. But for me, I'm so glad that I sold my car to be able to fork up the money to do that tour, because that tour to me was, you know, you can look back at 25 years or whatever it is being in a band, and usually what defines you as a band isn't so much one thing, one tour here, one tour there. That's more you know, if you're a singer and you're on Pop Idol or the X Factor or something like that. But for a band like us, it's things that you experience over time. Having said that, the Pantera tour is really one of the defining moments of Satyricon's career, because whatever we had done live up until that point was just doing stuff the way you not even assume, but more or less guess you're supposed to do it. And try and just get on with business. And everything was a really, really horrible experience. I hated and despised playing live. And when we did this tour, 6 weeks of watching Pantera's crew and how they do things, and watching the logistics and the day-to-day practicalities unfold from morning to evening for 1.5 months, that pretty much taught me. That was the foundation for everything I know today about touring. You know,
I always, as a kid, I used to read the guitar magazines, and I always used to read about this guy called Grady Champion, who was Dime's guitar tech or something like that. Did you ever meet that guy?
Every day for 6 weeks. And you know, see what was such an interesting thing about it is that you go through something like that and you say, well, you know, we don't have power. We're gonna be late for our stage time, but it's not our fault. And then, you know, their stage managers say, that's fine, just as long as you know that you still have to finish by 8:30, you know. And then it started to dawn upon me that what he's saying is, to me, whether you're 5 minutes late for your show because you're not fully prepared, doesn't really matter to me. You can do whatever you want, but by 8 o'clock, you have to finish, regardless. So if you take the stage at 7:55, you still have to be done by 8. And it was never hostile. It was just like, you know, this is how this works. For me, just getting a grasp of things and understanding how it works, that taught me that taught me how to deal with things. And it also taught me to stand up when Pantera said that, okay, they had their own catering truck for 6 weeks, and for 6 weeks we could barely afford food, and every day they were throwing away shitloads of food. And when they tried to insinuate that, is there any way we could have leftovers, we were basically told no. So when people say to me that, oh, well, we were supposed to get 4 cases of beer, not just 2. I tell them that, listen, when I played in Oslo with Pantera, my hometown, we played a venue that Satyricon at the time could sell out by itself. And then we were given a case of water. And then for some reason, the local promoter decided that it wasn't okay. So he walked into the dressing room and took it back,
Yeah. Do you think that was, is that what gave labels like Columbia and things like that the confidence to start dealing with you as a representative from your band and as a sort of representative of black metal generally?
Sorry, what was
that? Is it having been on a tour like that and having participated and learned like that? Is that what gave the bigger labels that you later went to? Is that what gave them kind of the confidence to say, yeah, here's a man whom we can do business with?
Possibly. I don't know. I've never thought about it that way, but that's possible.
Yeah.
That's possible.
Look, just a final thought, because unfortunately, I'm running out of a little time myself. Very quickly, I guess people will just want to know, what did you think of Dime on that tour? Did you hang out much, or what was he like? Now, obviously we're remembering him very fondly, but what was he like?
Yeah, I mean, a phenomenal guitar player, very charismatic guy, dead serious about his music. Is very, very intense. So him and I have a little bit of on and off relationship. I really respected Dime for everything that he represented as an artist. But Dime was also hard to be around, because when you were around Dime, everything has to be his way or no way at all.
Yeah.
So it was the kind of thing where if you don't necessarily want to do whiskey shots in the morning, he still wants you to do them, and when you politely turn them down, he will keep insisting.
Yeah. And
a little bit of a handful, but of course a great guy.
Indeed.
Yeah.
In the forest old, when the moon rise and the shadows fall, deep calleth upon deep, and in the forest old, deep calleth.
Pardon me for asking. I do have to ask. What was the conversation like when you told Frost about your tumour? What how did he deal with that as much as you? How did your longtime collaborator, your friend, how did he deal with it?
He was there. He was visiting me in hospital, and a neurosurgeon walked in and just said it, and I was happy that I had visitors right then, because that made everything seem so pragmatic in a way. I'm like, oh, okay, well, it sounds kind of bad, doesn't it? But I said I had my 40th birthday a couple of months later, and then I said in my speech, looking at Frost and one of my other friends, that whatever it is that neurosurgeon told me the day he walked into the room when you guys were visiting, I don't think I really understood what he said at the time, and I'm pretty sure you didn't either. And then they all nodded. So a little bit of a surprise to all of us. But the good news is that I'm actually doing fine.
Yes, and that is what we're all. That is what we're all willing. My final question: just how bad is the Lords of Chaos movie going to be?
Well, it's a bad book, right? So it's hard enough to make a good movie out of a good book. So I just don't know how they can make a good movie based on a horrible book. That's my take on it. But then on the other hand, I do not support the making of the movie. I do not support the idea in general. I think it's a lousy book. I don't like sensationalist stuff, and especially not when it's in the hands of someone who don't, who are not even a part of the scene and never have been a part of the scene. But then again, Jonas Åkerlund is a very, very good director. He's very, very good. And he's made some of the best music videos out there, and his movie Spun was also really good. Let's hope that he does better than we all fear.
So that was episode 44 of the Metal Insight podcast with Satyr from Satyricon. What a great chat, and one of black metal's real thinkers, I always thought. Next episode, we got more great stuff coming up from you, so keep tuning in. Subscribe on YouTube, leave a review on iTunes. It all really helps us get the word out. And keep checking Metalireland for all the best news from the Irish metal scene and beyond. I'm Earl Grey. This has been the Metal Insight podcast, episode 44. See you soon.